presentation to council and then refine that as necessary as we move forward. So with that, I would like to turn this over to Director Gregory to go over a couple of the, or highlight a couple of the fees that he thinks are important, and then use the rest of the time with council to discuss your questions and answer any questions that you might have. Greg?
Thank you, sir. Just to add on to what City Manager Knighton was referring to was the actual cost. And I gave you a handout of two different scenarios really of what we use. So the fees that you will see in here tonight are the higher of the two. So we use the indirect cost rate for each employee. There are two different options to either use the indirect cost rate, which is in some cases significantly higher than the fully loaded rate. So fully loaded rate would be all of your hourly and or salary and all of the benefits that come with that, from medical, vacation, all of those things. Indirect costs would encompass not only those, but also those indirect fees of all of us, the building, things like that that go into that indirect cost of that rate. So just something to keep in mind as we start to navigate through this, to understand that we use the higher of the two. So that is certainly a decision that the seven of you can make moving forward, which one of the two that we use. So just a little clarification there, but some of the significant ones, I guess, to point out that you have in front of you are of the lower scale, like a short-term right-of-way permit. Right now, we charge $15 for that activity. Our actual cost ends up being somewhere in the neighborhood of right around $60 for issuing a short-term permit, and really tried to condense this down and combine quite a few of these fees that really should have been all-encompassing originally, and for some reason it seemed like we just kept adding on to that, where we could have gotten that through, much like inspection fees, instead of having a wide variety of really unknown cost for those and unknown times to actually do those. We just put in a per hourly rate of $105, which is actual cost for an inspection. We would charge that out on all of these at a minimum of 1 hour. So no matter how long it took. And what that also does is create some evenness out of this entire thing, because if you look further back in like the civil plan review, before we had a minimum in certain categories of 4 hours. And really it's unfair to the applicant that brings forward a really good submittal, which that's really what we're looking for. It's complete, it's been well thought out, and it doesn't take us 4 hours to get through. So it really creates some equity there, or equality there that we didn't have before. But really, those are kind of the highlights. One more significant fee that we look at is the water meter and reclaim fee. Before, the city of Shelton covered that cost through either the water department or the sewer department. Water meters obviously in water, and the reclaim meters out of sewer for reclaim water. And we did not have a fee for that before. We are now proposing to have the customer pay for that water meter, and these rates or fees are for new radio feed or automatic read meters. So moving away from the old manual reads and starting to retrofit. Any new construction that would come would automatically put in a radio or automatic feed meter, and starting to move in that direction and starting to retrofit, which I think we'll look at in further discussions with the overall budget for 2020, is starting to look at retrofitting the entire city of Shelton in phases to move to automatic read. But those are kind of the big, broad scope of what we looked at, and some of the highlights and some of the larger fees that may be coming, or for you to ponder over and consider.
So what we were trying to do here, as you can see, is consolidate a lot of our fees, make it simpler for everybody to be able to read and determine what fits, what they'll need to do to move their project forward, and it'll make our conversations with applicants more efficient as they move forward and when they decide if they want to do a project here in the city of Shelton.
So we're talking down the road, probably quite a ways before we start retrofitting the whole city in sections. Is it down the road a ways?
That's gonna be a council decision.
That cost-
There are a lot of benefits and efficiencies that come from that. But really, within this fee schedule, we just wanted to start to move to that, in that direction for any new construction, that really we're not wasting what would be a manual read meter that's going in, in new construction, that we start to retrofit those now for when the council really decides to move in that direction.
So the new construction, the owners, or the builders or whatever who are building are going to pay that cost, right?
Correct. Right now, what we're proposing is that a move in that direction. Right now, the city individual enterprise fund pays for that meter.
So what happens when you decide to retrofit the whole city? Is the homeowner going to have to pay for that?
No, that would be a system-wide or an enterprise fund cost.
Okay, okay, all right.
Okay, other questions, comments? I'll start with one. It seems like I'm going to take the red as proposed. They're your costs, right?
Yes, Mayor,
Okay.
we're not proposing
Okay.
anything. These are actual costs, so.
But, a lot of our existing fees are per inspection, per something.
Correct.
So without knowing what our average time is, it's hard to equate, what the hourly rate that was based on, if it was based on anything. So I guess my question is, if we go to more of a per hourly model, we're basically putting the risk on the permittee, depending on our efficiencies, versus the per inspection rate is really putting the risk on the city, as far as someone coming in with a bad plan and takes you 6 hours, which should have been a half an hour inspection. So my concern is that we go to per hour. What is the constraint on the city performing well and not taking advantage, not intensely, but unintentionally taking advantage of a per hourly rate?
And City Manager Knighton and I talked about that earlier this week. And really, it would come down to, if somebody didn't feel like we were acting in an efficient fashion, really, they would come down to, Jeff would really be the person that they would come to. And ultimately, I think it would come down to his decision of whether we were being efficient or not, and really being the arbiter in that, and figuring out whether we were doing our job or not. And if we weren't, obviously, there are repercussions to that, but I don't know that any city staff would necessarily want to take advantage of that, or would in any case. But yeah, I think that would be the avenue forward if there was a dispute or somebody felt like they weren't being treated fairly.
Okay.
And if that's a major concern of council, what we can do is we can add in an appeals process where it would come to council following that. I wouldn't recommend that. If there were to be an appeals process, I think it would need to be more of a quasi-judicial process where it goes to a hearings examiner, basically an administrative law judge, to determine whether we were in fact over or undercharging for any particular item. But we can do that in either way that the council desires.
I'll just say it's not a concern, but on a large level, it is a concern, because if if it's a private industry and you're taking it to your local car shop, you could go down to the next car shop. If you felt, with the city, you're not in that situation. You're either gonna get your permit or you're not. So that's the only reason I have a large concern is, it's not a large concern, just that our people applying for a permit understand that if they feel they're not being treated fairly, as far as, that should only take half an hour, and have some knowledge that that's the case, then they have some recourse, and know what that recourse is, and that'd be talk to the city manager, or talk to directly to the manager and then the city manager.
Yeah.
And like I pointed out also, I think right now, you somewhat run that risk, or it may be a concern, but there's also a concern with these rates that have been in here for quite some time, that maybe aren't fairly distributed either. With these minimums, you know, there are categories that have, you know, the first 2 hours, the first 4 hours for some of the civil review, where if you were doing your due diligence and bringing in a really good application and we're charging you for 4 hours, when really it's only taking us an hour. So I think you could look at it on, you know, on both sides of that also, that even right now, I think somebody could technically come in and say, we don't know that we're getting treated fairly with us bringing a great submittal forward, and having our ducks in a row, as opposed to somebody that maybe is taking advantage of, hey, develop my project for me, I'm getting 4 hours out of you anyway. So I think you could look at it in both of those aspects.
So we could set, rather than a per hourly charge, we could set it just purely by review. But a couple things run the risk there. You have some projects that will take 1 or 2 submittals. You submit, receive comments back, and the next plan set comes back perfect. Or you could have 6 submittals where you're doing all the review work over those 6 submittals, still finding comments in order to do that. What we're trying to do with this fee structure is to incentivize people to provide us plans that we can immediately review and approve because they're well done, or at least through 1 or 2 reviews. But again, you know, there are different ways to do it. Incentivizing permit submittals this way in order to make it most cost efficient for the permittee and for us is the direction that we thought was best to go at this point. If council would like to see something else, we can certainly design something else for you to look at.
So, being an ex-builder in the city for 30, 35 years, I think it's important that whenever you're looking at fee schedules, to understand that it's kind of like there's a two-pronged thing. Number one is, it would be nice if you got paid for everything that we did. But in the same sense, if your fees are too high for what the market is, then we are experiencing a nice level of growth, continual growth, you know, on not only commercial but also residential. And we lowered a lot of our fees, you know, building fees, to kind of get that going. And I think jumping right back up to a rate that might be too high, just, this is, you could replay this when I said this like 7 years ago. So I think it's a balance, you know, and we're experiencing a lot of growth partially because we addressed the fact that we were pricing ourselves out of the market, and that in growing back into that, most departments are partially funded by the general fund. But the building department is always, you know, I mean, so to a degree, getting to where it's totally self-sustaining, that's a nice idea, but very few cities, I think, have a building department that doesn't draw a little bit from the general fund. So my concern is that we are cautious not to just say, well, this is fair, let's charge $2,000 for this, whatever it might be. Well, if we don't balance it into the cities that are surrounding us, we do want to capture, have an incentive to capture some of that growth. Because we will make more money if we have a little bit more growth, even though our fee might be slightly less than what some other cities are. Just broken record, just thought I'd throw it up, you know, and I do appreciate your input, because you got a new input to this group and the city, because we've had one city manager half a city manager and a quarter of a city manager, and now we have you, which has an experience in planning and things like that too. And so I think it's real good to charge whatever you can get, and everybody's taken care of, and we got all of our needs met. But as far as the general fund is concerned, I don't think you need to make it a hard, fast rule that everything that happens in the building department is totally funded, or that, you know, some of the general fund can't come back and feed that. So,
And it's, that is certainly a policy call for the council to make. I've seen, I think I mentioned at one of our previous work sessions, that I've seen cities do an 80-20 split, where you recover 80% through the permit fees and 20% through general fund. I've seen 90-10. Once we develop a full proposal for fees, not just engineering and not just planning, but all the fees, our financial services department will do a fiscal analysis on what that would mean for each split, each potential split that the council might want to consider.
if I could just tag on to my pre-comment there,
Go ahead,
is
sir.
I would be the first one to vote for and support raising fees to totally fund the building department, for example, if we were really in a real aggressive growth period where we were having to push people out of the doors. Now, but I also believe that we lowered them to increase it, and when we, as we grow, I think growing the rates with that growth, but I don't see it's quite as aggressive there yet. So I'm into the 80, 90, 100% thing, because we found when we actually lowered the fees that the year before, we funded out of the general fund, the building department funded like 85,000. We lowered the fees, and now we only took 15,000 out of the general fund. So it's not you charge more fees, you're going to get more money. If you drive builders away, you won't get any money. So yeah, I think it's a balance, and I just think that's what we ought to look at. You know,
A lot of it too is a function of utilizing the most efficient processes for our review times and those types of things, and we are working on that at the same time we're working on the permit fee schedules to make them the most efficient we can make them.
Other questions, comments?
Just a couple of questions.
Go ahead, Councilmember Schmidt.
The hourly rate piece, I appreciate you putting in, 30 minutes, so for the short-term maintenance permit for the right-of-way use, 30 minutes for Nicole to process, 10 minutes for Clint to review, 20 minutes for Jill or Lanita to fit, and those are broken out. That's fine. The expectation should be very clear, though, that you're not going to get your permit necessarily in an hour, just because we state that, here's the average cost. But I think that just kind of needs to be clear. I appreciate you breaking it down for us, but I don't think it needs to probably be broken down at some point down the road at that level. You know what I mean? It just, I don't want there to be an expectation that you show up at the front door and you just sit there and wait for an hour and you just get this immediate turnaround, because I don't believe there's any city in the state of Washington that really does that anyways. But there's a few other pieces with the appeals process. Not comfortable with the appeals process unless there's some sort of measurement in place that we can actually say we did a bad job or we did a great job. So until we have that, I don't feel confident with having like any sort of appeal or arbitration of said fees. And that kind of goes into maybe the last a couple pieces here. Until we kind of have some stronger trends or some stronger data to kind of back up whether or not fees increase or decrease or, make it unattractive to want to do business with the city, that, just coming up with a number in between. I believe in high quality service first. And if it costs $85 an hour for high quality service or whatever, I think that more or less, like adding to your comment that builders, developers, et cetera, are going to want to do more business with us because they know what to expect and they know that they're going to get what they pay for. Again, we can't justify what they're paying for until we have a system in place that measures that and fully understands that. So, kind of to be determined, but I appreciate the work on this. Is very clear and straightforward delivery, so I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor? Anyone else? I have a specific question, because I think we discussed this when we went through the right-of-way permits a month or so. Didn't we have something come up on those? Now the rates increase, and I had a question, I think we kind of asked the question, if someone downtown put a ladder on the sidewalk to do a half an hour maintenance on their awning, I think technically they would need a right-of-way permit. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that would be the expectation from the city?
That is correct.
Okay, so I just want to be clear on that.
And that's for a multitude of reasons, from public safety would be the biggest one. ADA requirements, if somebody goes and puts a ladder on a sidewalk that's, doesn't give 4 feet of clearance, certainly it affects ADA. All of a sudden, we don't have a pedestrian plan in place. So, yeah, even those, what is a short-term right-of-way permit, even those short-term activities can have large implications, negative things come out of it. So we certainly want to grasp all of those and make sure that we're addressing those and making sure that everything is in place that needs to be there.
So those permits, right-of-way permits, are they given, if someone comes in on a Friday at 1 or 2 in the afternoon and says, you know what, I was just looking at my awning, it really needs to be cleaned, I have time tomorrow. Is that permit given to them right there?
Most of those short-term permits can be given over the counter.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I mean, you don't have to see if it's ADA or, it just,
Normally, if there's a ladder on the sidewalk or scaffolding or something like that, we'll have them put up a sidewalk closed with an arrow
You have
pointing
a-
them to the other side of the road
we have signs.
at a crosswalk that can be placed out there, yes.
Do you have the signs that you give the people if they need it?
We do not give out signs,
Okay.
no.
All right. Okay.
Follow up on that, Craig. Is that by lot, by legal owner, or can that be by a group of businesses, say on half a block, decide to do it all at one time? That'd be one permit,
Sure,
is that correct?
sure. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. If somebody wanted to come in and close down an entire block or a couple of blocks, as long as we had a pedestrian plan or a traffic plan in place, certainly,
It's per project.
yes.
Okay.
Councilmember Cron?
Just a quick question, kind of about, it's not something that's, I think, gonna affect this, but I think I was told, somebody told me the other day that we're requiring a permit for individual irrigation sprinkler systems in lawns or gardens. Do you know anything about that? Are we requiring a permit for in your yard, for an irrigation to water your yard with? We are.
Part of a plumbing permit.
Which
Okay.
then affects also a backflow device. So there's multiple, not only the plumbing permit through the building department, but it also affects our water department too with a backflow device that would need to be installed also.
And that
If it's
has,
going to irrigation.
that has to be checked every year, backflow, doesn't it?
A backflow device needs to be tested,
Tested every year,
correct?
yeah, okay.
Anything else?
What if we watered a garden with a hose?
Should
We
be
wouldn't
hooked up to a
use that,
backflow
would we?
at your hose bib, correct?
To what?
Or
Not,
vacuum
as long
breaker?
as it's not submerged into a pool or something like that, where if we had a main break, that it's siphoning water back out. So, yeah, if you're out watering your garden with your hose and there's no
I know, I'm.
risk of any sort of backflow into that, no, you wouldn't need one.
You know, I guess part of it, not to drag this out, because obviously I don't want to be here for 5 hours tonight, but I would imagine if you required a permit just for the backflow apparatus, I would probably feel a lot more better, like, so that's taken care of. Then, however you wanted, because if you wanted to put some sprinklers in your, I mean, it seems kind of crazy that you have to have an inspection to put some sprinklers in your yard if you're paying the water bill. But the backflow issue, couldn't you just make the permit and inspection to make sure that you had the backflow valve? Let's say you just ran it off of your hose bib that came out of your house, that was what you were gonna power your thing, and said, okay, you require this backflow apparatus. But from that point on, is it really the city's business what people do in their backyards? I'm just kinda,
No, that's essentially where our inspection ends. is at that point. If it's domestic water, then there's criteria, there's depth of the burial of the pipe, there's making sure there's not other connections in there that might create cross-contamination. But for a sprinkler system, that's essentially where the inspection will end, is where the cross-connection or the backflow device is located.
But you still inspect whether, how deep they put their water lines?
Not the irrigation system, for a domestic water to your house.
You just want to know
drinking
they got that valve on there.
water, Correct?
The plumbing
That's
permit
all.
is really the mechanism to make sure that we get the backflow.
And I can see that, that makes sense, and, yeah, I've just, so they do not inspect your little irrigation system, you just inspect the valve,
No,
right?
sir, yeah.
I appreciate that, thank you very much.
Okay. Anything else? Anything else you need from council for this group?
I don't think so. Appreciate the discussion. If there's any concerns as we're developing the full fee schedule that come up, let us know and we'll take a look at it.
Okay. All right. So we're going to adjourn the study session.